I never thought a swimming pool could start a war, but then again, I never thought my quiet, tree-lined neighborhood would become a battleground either. If you told me 6 months ago that a single backyard project would divide families and friendships and turn our HOA meetings into something out of a courtroom drama, I would have laughed. But that was before the pool, before the rules were broken, before the lines were drawn. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Early one Saturday morning, I was sipping coffee on my porch when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was just another landscaping crew, maybe someone finally tackling the overgrown hedges at the end of the block. But as the hours passed, the noise grew louder, more insistent. By noon, the air was thick with the scent of diesel and fresh earth. I wandered down the sidewalk, curiosity getting the better of me, and that's when I saw it. A backhoe, a dump truck, and a crew of workers tearing up the backyard of the house next door. My neighbor, Mark, stood in the middle of it all, hands on his hips, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Mark and his wife, Lisa, had moved in 2 years ago, and while we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries, we weren't exactly close. Still, I waved, and he waved back, shouting over the noise, "Big change is coming." I smiled, nodded, and walked back home, thinking nothing of it. After all, people renovate all the time. Maybe they were putting in a new patio, or finally getting rid of that old swing set their kids had outgrown. But by the end of the day, it was clear this was no ordinary project. The hole in Mark's backyard was massive, easily 30 feet long and 10 feet wide. The next morning, a cement truck arrived, followed by a crew with rebar and forms. By Monday, the shape of a pool was unmistakable. That's when the whisper started. Our neighborhood, Stillwater Estates, is governed by a homeowners association. Like most HOAs, we have rules, lots of them. Some make sense: no unkempt lawns, no cars parked on the street overnight, no loud parties after 10 p.m. Others are more controversial: no fences over 6 feet, no exterior paint colors outside the approved palette, and most importantly, no major construction without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Pools in particular are a sore subject. The last time someone tried to install one, the process dragged on for months, with endless debates about setbacks, drainage, and aesthetics. In the end, the project was denied, and the would-be pool owners moved away in frustration. So when word got out that Mark was building a pool, and that he hadn't submitted a single form or attended a single meeting, people were furious. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a group text. Our HOA president, Mrs. Caldwell, sent a message to the entire block. "Has anyone spoken to Mark about the construction? No permits have been filed. This is a serious violation." Within minutes, replies flooded in. Some were angry, others confused. A few defended Mark, saying it was his property and he should be able to do as he pleased. But most were outraged. "If he gets away with this, what's the point of having rules?" one neighbor wrote. "We all have to follow the same guidelines." The next day, a notice appeared on Mark's front door: "Cease and desist. All construction must stop immediately pending review by the HOA." But the work continued. Trucks came and went, workers poured concrete, and the pool took shape. Mark, for his part, seemed unfazed. When confronted by Mrs. Caldwell, he simply shrugged and said, "I'm just improving my property. The rules are ridiculous anyway." That's when the real battle began. The HOA called an emergency meeting, and for the first time in years, nearly every household showed up. The community center was packed, the air thick with tension. Mrs. Caldwell stood at the front, gavel in hand, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "We are a community of laws," she began. "If we allow one person to break the rules, we undermine everything we've built here." Mark was there too, sitting in the back with his arms crossed. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't hold back. "These rules are arbitrary and outdated," he said. "I pay my dues like everyone else. Why shouldn't I be able to enjoy my property? It's not like I'm hurting anyone." The room erupted. Some neighbors cheered, others booed. Old grievances surfaced, arguments about landscaping, noise complaints, even disputes over Halloween decorations. It was as if the pool had become a symbol for every frustration, every resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. As the meeting dragged on, alliances formed and sides were chosen. Some saw Mark as a hero, standing up to an overbearing HOA. Others saw him as a selfish rule breaker, threatening the harmony of the neighborhood. The board threatens fines, legal action, even a lien on Mark's property. Mark threatened to sue, claiming the HOA was overreaching its authority. Meanwhile, the pool grew closer to completion. Every day, more neighbors stopped by to watch, some offering encouragement, others shaking their heads in disapproval. The tension was palpable. Friendships that had lasted for years began to fray. People who once hosted barbecues together now crossed the street to avoid each other. I found myself caught in the middle. On one hand, I understood the need for rules. Without them, chaos could reign. On the other, I sympathized with Mark's desire for autonomy. After all, wasn't the whole point of owning a home to make it your own? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a pool. It was about control, about freedom, about what it means to be part of a community. By the end of the month, the situation had reached a boiling point. The HOA had issued daily fines, totaling thousands of dollars. Mark had hired a lawyer, and rumors of a lawsuit spread like wildfire. The next HOA meeting promised to be explosive. As I walked past Mark's house that evening, I saw him sitting by the edge of his unfinished pool, staring into the waterless basin. He looked tired, worn down by the fight. I wondered if it was all worth it. The night before the next HOA meeting, I barely slept. The air in Stillwater Estates felt charged, as if a summer storm was about to break. I kept replaying the arguments in my head. Mark's stubborn insistence on his rights, Mrs. Caldwell's unwavering commitment to the rules. The neighbors whispered conversations on the sidewalks. It was as if the pool had become a mirror, reflecting every hope, fear, and frustration in our community. I wondered if anyone else felt the same sense of dread, the uneasy feeling that something fundamental was about to change. The meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock, but by 6:30, the parking lot was already full. People streamed into the community center, some carrying folders stuffed with documents, others clutching coffee cups or water bottles as if preparing for a long night. I took a seat near the middle, close enough to see the board, but far enough to observe the crowd. Mark arrived a few minutes later, flanked by his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Caldwell sat at the head table, her gavel resting on a stack of papers. The rest of the board members looked tense, their faces drawn and pale. As the clock struck 7, Mrs. Caldwell called the meeting to order. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she read the agenda. "We are here to address a serious violation of our community's covenants," she began. "Mr. Thompson has constructed a swimming pool without the required approvals. This is not just a matter of paperwork. It is a matter of principle." Mark's lawyer stood up, her tone calm but firm. "My client has the right to improve his property. The HOA's restrictions are overly broad and, in our view, unenforceable. We are prepared to challenge them in court if necessary." A murmur ran through the room. Some neighbors nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. One by one, residents took the floor. Some spoke passionately in favor of Mark, arguing that the HOA had become too controlling, stifling creativity and personal freedom. "We moved here for the sense of community, not to be micromanaged," one woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. "If Mark wants a pool and it doesn't hurt anyone, why should we stop him?" Others were just as passionate in their opposition. "If we let this slide, what's next?" a man countered. "Garish paint colors? Broken down cars and driveways? We have rules for a reason." The debate grew heated. Old wounds reopened. Someone brought up the time the HOA fined a family for planting the wrong kind of tree. Another neighbor complained about a shed that had been painted an unapproved shade of blue. It became clear that the pool was just the latest in a long line of grievances, a flashpoint for years of pent-up frustration. As the arguments raged, I found myself thinking about what it meant to live in a community. Was it about conformity, about everyone following the same rules for the greater good? Or was it about individuality, about respecting each person's right to make their own choices? The truth, I realized, was somewhere in between. We needed rules, but we also needed flexibility, compassion, and understanding. After nearly 2 hours of debate, Mrs. Caldwell called for a vote. The board would decide whether to pursue legal action against Mark or seek a compromise. The room fell silent as the votes were cast. 3 in favor of legal action, 2 against. The decision was made. the HOA would take Mark to court. The aftermath was immediate. Mark's lawyer announced that they would file a countersuit, challenging the HOA's authority. The neighborhood split into factions. Some neighbors rallied around Mark, offering support and encouragement. Others doubled down on their commitment to the rules, organizing petitions and letter-writing campaigns. The sense of community that had once defined Stillwater Estates began to unravel. In the weeks that followed, the battle moved from the community center to the courthouse. Legal documents flew back and forth, each side digging in their heels. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, and soon reporters were knocking on doors, looking for quotes and sound bites. The pool, still unfinished, became a symbol of the conflict, a concrete reminder of the divisions that now defined our neighborhood. As the legal battle dragged on, the mood in Stillwater Estates grew darker. Neighbors who had once shared holiday cookies and summer barbecues now avoided each other. Children who used to play together in the park were kept apart by feuding parents. Even the annual block party was canceled, a casualty of the ongoing war. Through it all, Mark remained defiant. He continued to work on the pool, sometimes late into the night, the sound of hammers and saws echoing through the quiet streets. Mrs. Caldwell and the board responded with more fines, more threats of legal action. The rest of us watched, caught in the crossfire, wondering how it would all end. One evening, as I walked past Mark's house, I saw him standing by the edge of the pool, staring into the deep end. I hesitated, then called out to him. He looked up, his face tired but determined. "Do you ever wish you just filled it in and walked away?" I asked. He smiled. A sad, weary smile. "Every day," he said. "But then I remember why I started. Sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in, even if it costs you." I nodded, unsure of what to say. As I walked home, I realized that the real cost of the pool wasn't measured in dollars or legal fees. It was measured in friendships lost, trust broken, and a community divided. The war over the pool had changed us all, and I wondered if we would ever find our way back. The court date arrived on a gray, drizzling morning that seemed to mirror the mood of the entire neighborhood. I watched from my window as Mark and his lawyer loaded thick binders of documents into the trunk of her car. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell and two board members did the same, their faces set in grim determination. The rest of us waited, the tension in Stillwater Estates as heavy as the clouds overhead. For weeks, the legal battle had consumed every conversation, every block email, every whispered exchange at the mailbox. The pool was no longer just a hole in the ground. It was a wound, raw and festering, that refused to heal. The trial itself was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and even a few curious onlookers from other communities. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. Mark's lawyer argued that the HOA's rules were vague, inconsistently enforced, and, in some cases, outdated. She presented evidence of other homeowners who had made changes to their properties without prior approval: new decks, expanded patios, and even a sunroom that had somehow escaped notice. Selective enforcement, she called it, and the phrase seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Caldwell's lawyer countered with binders full of covenants, bylaws, and meeting minutes. He argued that the rules were clear, that every homeowner had agreed to them upon moving in, and that the integrity of the community depended on their enforcement. "If we allow one person to break the rules," he said, echoing Mrs. Caldwell's words from the meeting, "we set a precedent that will erode the very foundation of Stillwater Estates." The judge listened patiently, asking pointed questions, her gaze flicking from one side to the other. At one point, she asked Mark why he hadn't simply applied for approval before starting construction. Mark hesitated, then admitted, "I didn't think it would be approved. I've seen what happens to people who try. I just wanted something for my family, something to make our home special." His voice was quiet, but the words carried weight. I saw a few neighbors shift uncomfortably in their seats. The trial lasted 3 days. Each side called witnesses, neighbors, board members, even the contractor who had built the pool. The stories were familiar. Tales of frustration with the HOA, stories of projects denied or delayed, memories of happier times before the rules became so rigid. By the end, it was clear that the pool was just the tip of the iceberg. The real issue was trust. Trust in the board, trust in the rules, trust in each other. When the judge finally delivered her verdict, the room held its breath. She ruled that Mark had indeed violated the HOA's covenants by failing to seek approval. However, she also found that the HOA had been inconsistent in its enforcement, allowing some projects to slip through while cracking down on others. The pool could stay, she decided, but Mark would have to pay a fine and agree to additional landscaping to mitigate the impact on his neighbors. The board, in turn, was ordered to review and update the community's rules, making them clearer and more consistent. The decision was met with a mix of relief and resentment. Mark was allowed to finish his pool, but the victory felt hollow. The board was chastened but not defeated. The rest of us were left to pick up the pieces to try and rebuild the sense of community that had been shattered by months of conflict. In the weeks that followed, life in Stillwater Estates slowly returned to normal. The pool was completed, surrounded by a new privacy hedge and tasteful landscaping. Mark's children splashed and laughed, their joy a small but welcome reminder of happier times. The board held a series of open forums, inviting residents to share their concerns and suggest changes to the rules. Attendance was high, and the conversations, while sometimes heated, were honest and productive. Gradually, the wounds began to heal. Neighbors who had stopped speaking started to wave again. The annual block party was reinstated, and while the turnout was smaller than in years past, it was a start. Mrs. Caldwell announced that she would not seek re-election as HOA president, citing the need for new leadership and fresh ideas. Mark, for his part, apologized publicly for the way he had handled the situation, acknowledging that he should have followed the proper channels. As summer faded into fall, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The pool, once a symbol of division, had become just another feature in the neighborhood. The real legacy of the conflict was the lesson it had taught us all. That community is not just about rules and regulations, but about understanding, compromise, and forgiveness. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I walked past Mark's house and saw him sitting by the pool watching his children play. He looked up and smiled, and for the first time in months, I smiled back. The war was over, and while the scars remained, there was hope for healing. We were neighbors again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life neighborhood dramas and HOA tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let me know. Whose side would you have taken? And have you ever experienced something similar in your own community? Your stories and opinions make this channel what it is, so join the conversation.